Hey there, everybody. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from, of course, the Philanthropy Mastermind series. Thank you for your patience. And no, Jonathan, you are not late. Your internet may be slow, maybe not, but we were late, a few minutes late today, but that's fine. It's par for the course working with the internet today. But it does mean we can be right there with you in your office or maybe at home to talk about the big issues. And that's definitely what we're going to be doing today. But before we get underway and I have the chance to introduce our guest, who I'm so happy to have here today, I want to welcome all of you, of course, to this series and to thank our sponsor, DonorSearch, who has been generously providing a platform for conversations like this one since 2016. We have now about 575 programs we've done. Many are recorded, especially from the last 2 years, and available for you over on the DonorSearch YouTube channel or the DonorSearch site at donorsearch.net. So you can get all of that there. Do check that out after today's program. And you can also get a recording of this one. Yes, you will find this one recorded and posted to those two places after the program today. But do stick around because it's your chance to be a part of the conversation. So don't go away. And also, we'd love you to be a part of the conversation starting right now. And we already have a couple folks doing it. Those are April and Jonathan have already said hello. We'd love to see the rest of you just say hello in the chat. Maybe let us know which part of the country or the world that you're coming in from, and maybe which organization you're with or what you do. Any of that will contribute to the conversation and certainly be a great way to let our guests know that you're here. And thank you, Ellie and Jonathan, Sophia, Alora, Sky, and the rest of you for saying hello. We really do appreciate that. Hi, April. Hi, Rowena. Oh, Brian, great. Kyle, Tanya. Oh, we really love that. So please do keep that space warm and use that as your sandbox to play. You can also use the Q&A throughout. So all of those things are there for you. We'll be monitoring it throughout, both myself, our guest, but also our producer, Jack, in the wings. So please do use those spaces. Now, I want to, of course, take a moment to introduce our guest today, someone who I hope is known to you. And if they're not, you'll be really glad you're making this person as a friend, a leader in the field, someone who definitely has a lot to contribute on this subject and many others, and that is Lee Ernst. So first, I'll just say hello, Lee, before I
Hey, hello, Jay. Of course, good to see you, and hello to everyone. Thanks so much. I actually want to see how many of us can say where we're from. I really appreciated Jay reading the comments as quick as we can. I think I saw a Scotland in there as well. So good to be
Oh,
with you.
awesome. Yes, you did from the University of
There we go.
Aberdeen. Wow, that is great. Yes, great, and great to see my my old alma mater school right there in Ann Arbor. So lots of great places. Please do keep that warm there. We really do want you to be a part of the conversation today on decoding nonprofit data, transforming insights into action. But before we do that, I want to give just a brief thumbnail sketch about Lee, in case you're not familiar with her work. Lee is, of course, the COO and senior consultant and incoming CEO of Johnson Gross Nickel Associates, or JGA, as it's often known for short, a leading firm in this space. Does terrific work, and you'll want to learn more about them later. We'll make sure to include a link in the chat to that, as well as a way that you can reach out to Lee Ernst afterwards today. And if you're not familiar with her work personally, in addition to all the stuff that she's done through her counsel there at JGA, before joining the team back in 2013, she provided counsel as development officer consultant with the Women's Philanthropy Institute at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, and previously worked as associate director at the University of Chicago during their $2 billion campaign, that's with a B, working closely with the boards and giving councils to create the inaugural Parents Program fundraising initiative, and began her career at the Salvation Army Divisional Headquarters in Chicago, which is, for people who don't know the Salvation Army world, that's a pretty big deal. Also, lots of other work with boards and so forth, including with something that's, I know, very close to her and where she has chaired before, and that's the Giving Institute. So that may or may not come up in the conversation today, but it's something I hope you all will follow, because the Giving USA, which is connected, of course, to the Giving Institute, comes out later this month. And in fact, we will have a special program with Josh Burkholz and Nathan Chappelle coming up on the day that's released. So make sure to check your email. You'll find that that's going to be at 11:30 in the morning, the day of its release. But anyway, enough of that. Lee, thank you so much for being willing to talk about the subject that's, I know, near and dear to you. about, of course, nonprofit data.
Yeah.
That can be very dry or it can be very exciting. I know it's exciting with you. So where do we start that conversation? What are the key trends that you're looking at?
Sure. Yeah, well, again, really good to sit down with you virtually, Jay, and to see you. I always appreciate the time to have conversations. And as we think about our virtual kind of table here, or all the people that are on here, being able to just hear their thoughts, comments, questions. So look forward to those as well. Um, to your question on kind of where do we start in the trends, I will tell you, if you were to have asked me the question, fun or dry? Pick one of those words. Is data fun or is it dry? You know, I might have leaned toward the word dry a decade ago. And I say that because we have had a monumental shift, I think, in the way we as a sector, the fundraising sector, the nonprofit sector, the generosity sector, however we identify with it, how we're thinking about data. I think for some, it's because we've been so hungry for the clarity of data, the better understanding of who our prospects are, the better access to tools, to technology, to more thoughtful strategy on data. And I think for some, it can be really overwhelming, scary, or terrifying because it's a little nebulous, isn't it? Sometimes we hear you must use AI in data or decoding data, and it can sometimes, I think, be paralyzing. And I say all that because for me, sitting at JGA as a fundraising consultant, we have seen some of the biggest transformations in the work that we do with nonprofits as the board member, as a volunteer that I sit on, when we get to be able to use the data to really help us start to understand how we can do better work with our donors. So that's the fun part to me, right? How we can really use it. The trends, to your more specific question, what are the trends that we're seeing in data? If I were to put maybe a timestamp on that over the last few years, maybe 3 or 4 years, three things are coming to mind. One, we all know the different generations now in society, right? We all identify maybe with the different generations. Each generation has its own style of giving, whether it's a millennial or a Gen X or a boomer. Each individual does, but we have to be cognizant of how each individual is giving. And sometimes looking at generations, I think, can kind of give us a guardrail, right? Our map. So that's one trend, the generational differences in giving. Second, it's, I think, a little bit to what I alluded to earlier, which is data is no longer a luxury in our work as fundraising. It's a necessity, right? Long gone are the days where we go, well, we're not a big shop. Sorry, we don't have the big budget. Nope, data is accessible to everyone. And then I think the third is this AI revolution. And I think that's a whole nother topic, Jay, that we could spend 5 hours on, but heaven forbid anyone want to take 5 hours, right, on AI right now. But I'm in all seriousness, I think the idea of how does AI get integrated into our work as fundraising are the three that really kind of rise to the top, at least from my seat that I sit in.
Um, can we look at each of those in a little more detail?
Of course.
So the generational piece first. I'm always fascinated with this in part because on one level, I completely agree. There are big differences how we are raised, where we come from, our experience influences the way we think about everything, the way we think about and talk about giving.
Mm,
Um, and but at the same time, a lot of the definitions are kind of placed over on us
mhm,
by the marketing
mhm,
ecosystem. So when you think about those generational differences, what are some of the ones that are most informed or informative, I should say,
mhm,
for you? I mean, what do you look to as kind of guideposts for how to think about
mm,
that within the context of a database or a fundraising
mhm.
program?
It's a really good question. I think one, it's communication preferences. When we think about fundraising and the act of building relationships, which is the heart of what all of us in the field, and in some regard, right, are doing or aiming to do to inspire and elevate a mission,
Yeah.
we now have so many ways that we can talk to people, communicate people, engage in people. So I think trying to gain specificity on how people like to be communicated with. Where I think we're in a really fun spot right now in the sector is we now know how to do that. I think even my days back at University of Chicago in the early 2000s or others, it was, well, I'm going to send an email or a phone or a direct mail. There was a more, and at least this is from my lens, a traditional approach or more standard approach that you could kind of see being used across the different sectors, whether you're higher ed or arts and culture, small or big, where now, because we have access to technology and data, it's not just an email or a phone call. We can start to figure out the different communication preferences, either for the generational differences or the individual. And we have tools that allow us to better understand our organization's donors' preferred methods. You know, we can use things like psychographics. We can use things like personas. So using things like that to me help give you the guardrail necessary. So I think to your original point, how do we make sure we're not just using stereotypes?
Yeah, that's what I get concerned with sometimes. I've heard people, especially when they talk about Gen Z, and people used to do it with millennials, kind of putting everybody in one big lump and saying,
Mhm.
the old thing about millennials, and now I'm just thinking about their actions, not so much their personalities, which was another level of bias in describing
True.
millennials. But uh, people saying, well, they don't want to take a phone call, one of these kind of massive, statements.
Mhm.
But what you're saying is there's a way to, I guess, to tailor this, to listen and then act according to what we learn. Is that right?
It is, and it's actually something that we internally at JGA were starting, it was about 4 or 5 years ago, we were starting to hear more and more regularly from the nonprofits that we serve. So we're a national consulting firm, right? And we're engaging higher ed and arts and culture and faith-based. So it's a different variety of sectors. But we were starting to hear the same theme or this similar pain point, whatever you want to call it, which was, I have this really big fundraising goal that's been either put upon me, set forth, and I'm not really sure how to see my way clear to the goal, either because I'm not sure who are the best individuals to engage, or maybe I have a decent understanding of who might want to engage. I don't know how to engage them in a way that isn't to the masses. So when we started to hear that time and time again, you start to realize, well, maybe there's something to this, right? Maybe you take this and run with it. So what we started to do is really explore the topic of what does it look like for nonprofits to have access to predictive analytic tools that can not only identify good, great, potentially really um, highly engaged prospects, those that are wanting to support you financially, but also have volunteered with you or engaged with you. But what if we were to able to not only have understanding of your best prospects, but now know what to say to them? What if we were to start to get clarity on how they like to be communicated with?
Right.
And so we actually, JJ in this instance actually worked with a company, and we it's called Acuity Darts, and it's persona based work. It uses psychographics and surveys and focus groups, but we really drove an effort again over the past 5 years because we found the tremendous need of nonprofits to gain precision. I mean, I think at the end of the day, donors are coming to our organizations with a level of sophistication that we haven't seen before. They're requiring a certain type of impact, understanding, engagement, clarity of their gifting. I think we as the fundraisers, practitioners, have to meet them and to be able to have a sophistication of how they want to be engaged. I think it can be almost offensive to the donor to say, I've gotten your form letter and my gift was really personal and it's been met with a letter. So I'm digressing a little bit, but I think it goes back to then how do we align
Mhm.
our behavior with the donor's intent and behavior, and
Right.
using those personas and psychographics to really kind of get into that.
And Lee, if you don't mind, because I often see that we have a wide range of experience in the room.
Mhm.
So for those who are attending live, I'd love to know if you are familiar with or have utilized psychographics and other predictive analytical tools in your work, or if it would be helpful to further define these things. And in fact, just as we're listening to see what people say, do you mind giving a kind of a quick description about what you mean when you say psychographics?
I can, and what I will do, I'll give a visual actually, Jay, because
Okay.
I think sometimes visuals can help us more than anything else, or maybe visuals are better than Lee's words. How about that sometimes? Uh, but but I think it's a really good question. I'm glad you asked because it is, and I'm just making sure you can see this, okay?
Okay.
And so what I would say would be what you see here on the screen is an example
Mhm.
to your question, Jay, on personas, on psychographics. So
Would you
psychographic,
mind making that slide a little bit
oh,
largerly?
yeah, of course. Oops,
Oops.
I'm sorry. Let me,
Oh, that's quite all right. I just
I'll
realized we
start
were,
that again. I was goofing on that.
and we
Uh,
did have a note from Colleen while you're pulling that up, just saying that she has not used, but she's thinking about a psychographic similar to a donor avatar, which is what the other piece we're talking about personas, and maybe you have those definitions here too. And Kelly was saying haven't heard that they have not heard of psychographics and would love a clear definition. So I know you're going to provide those. And part of the reason for talking about this is because there's products that use these labels, but then there's also the way to think about these things, which is what I love about what you're doing right now. You're helping us to define the terms.
yeah,
Oh,
and I think
yeah,
that's really important to
perfect.
define, kind of the define the terms. Yeah, thank you. So essentially what psychographics does is it's using an individual's personality
Mhm.
to better understand how to engage, how to communicate, how to message with that individual. We probably, all of us on this call, have been recipients of having psychographics used to us. Just one example would be the college enrollment and admissions process. If you think about the type of messaging or marketing that is often sent to high school students or incoming students to college,
Mhm.
there is personalized, customized messaging to that individual, speaking to things that drive them, that motivate them, rather than having the same language used against all of the incoming. And I'll tell you, that was the other thing that really drove us to start thinking, I think, to your point, Jay, about how do we go from identifying best prospects to engaging, to understanding messaging. We saw it happening in enrollment. Well, why can't it happen in fundraising? I think it's, our profession deserves the very best access to building relationships with our donors. Because again, at the end of the day, how do we build community and how do we build relationships? So if we think about psychographics and using personality and using specific feedback from an individual, and you gather it from surveys and you gather it from focus groups and you run it across large databases, what it allows you to do is to start to understand how your prospects, your donors, can align with specific archetypes or personas, profiles. So that's why I put on the screen here, which I think can sometimes be a helpful visual to say, if we look at an entire database, this is a sample, an entire database. In this case, we had on the far left side, roughly 30% of all the donors that went through this effort identifying with the primary drivers that you see below: fulfilling unmet needs, compassion for underserved. This was a human services organization. And so that's why it aligned. What's not here, but what's behind these different profiles is not only telling them what's most important to them, it's how they like to be communicated with. Do they like social media? Do they have a high tolerance or do they have a low tolerance? Do they like email or low email? Do they want one email or do they want many? When you start to understand their drivers, then you use that in your messaging and language, whether it's a phone call or an email or a text. And then the same with choosing your different communication channels as well. But we went from kind of the mass appeals, and I'll stop sharing for a second. We went from the mass appeals, Jay,
Mhm.
to starting to think about affinity groups, right? Maybe we fundraise to the athletic association or to the nursing program. I think what we're shifting now from the affinity is to personas, to individually based motivating factors. And I think that's going to be a key piece. If I bring us back to the top of the question again around trends and data, I think that's a really big piece. The more we can lean into that, the better we are. And again, that's why JGA created the product Acuity Darts to say, how do we start to lean in? How do nonprofits have access to these resources and these tools, and not just a university or a large hospital? They are important, but how do we make it more accessible to all nonprofits?
Right, right. And by the way, I want to make sure I'm getting that right. The product Acuity Darts, is that right? So
Acuity
I love the
Darts.
sound of that. Yeah. So targeting, but from meeting people where they are, I guess, as opposed to where we think they should be, which was the old mode.
Hey, what a concept, being donor centric, right? And meeting the donor where they are.
Right, right. And we had some great questions along the way. Do you mind if I share a couple of them with you as we're
Yeah, of
talking?
course.
And by the way, Brian, thank you for jumping in there and talking about avatars. That was really helpful. Jacqueline had said that, or asked rather, if these same personality types are reflected among corporate donors, or does the strategy differ dramatically between corporate donors and perhaps foundation donors and individuals? What are your thoughts on that?
That is a great question. So here's where I'll start. My mind is going, okay, don't take an hour on this, because I could pontificate, which I don't know if anyone wants to hear me pontificating for an hour between individual, corporate, and foundation. But if we think about who's making the decisions as a corporate donor, it's the individual, right? And the same for the foundation. But we also know that the giving motivations are often different. If it's in a corporation, the decision makers, maybe the board that's making the decisions, the same with the foundation. So big picture, what I would say is this applies best to individuals, where we are able to engage with them fully from a decision making and motivation standpoint. You can engage corporate donors in the same way, but you must take into account the different factors that impact the way in which they provide gifting or engage in gifting. And sometimes that can be harder to do in the corporate structure they sit in and or the foundation structure they sit in. For example, the foundation, if they require an application process, right? Well, that's a different type of engagement. We also know that individual giving makes up the majority of giving in America, which many of us will be hearing webinars, as you were just saying earlier, Jay, with Giving USA coming out soon. JJ is doing our webinar on the 25th with Anna Pruitt, the managing director. And so we'll see what that looks like. But I think the headline is individual giving, we know has the most ability in terms of gifting and being able to have those conversations and motivation, and not having some guardrails put in place that structurally are required by a corporation or a foundation.
Right. So I guess ultimately we're focusing on the person, and there are people behind companies and foundations too,
That's a good
but
point.
maybe the considerations are different. I mean, to your point, Lee, we also had another question, which maybe you'll address throughout the course of the conversation or not, but that's from Sonia, who said, can you give examples of survey questions to get this information to help you do that tailoring?
Yes, I'm saying yes because I'm happy offline to give you a more detailed survey, but what it's doing, the surveys are really getting to how they are motivated, what inspires them. So part of it is thinking about the mission of the organization and asking question about what are the key elements that inspire them based on the work of the organization. So that's just one example. But again, we can follow up offline with much more detailed info on that.
Sure. And you will have contact information towards the end of our discussion today, so
Sure.
people can reach out to you. But I didn't mean to take us off track, but thank you very
No,
much
that's okay.
for that. So that's
there's a lot going on in the world of data, right? As we think about fundraising and all the things going on.
There is, and demystifying it is so important, because I know we adopt the terminology for clarity, but if not everybody's reading the same dictionary, then we end up with a problem talking with each other. So very helpful. Thank you. And now we were also talking about how data is no longer a luxury, and maybe that does dovetail with AI. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it does. I like that, Jay. If it doesn't, you're dovetailing it now, and I'm going to run with it.
So run with it. I mean, first of all, AI is another one of those things where we could spend 5 hours, like you said earlier, just talking about that, but also just slicing and dicing. What does it really mean? Are we talking about this kind of AI or that kind of AI, and who is it from, and what does it mean, and how applicable is it to our purpose? But the idea that it's no longer a luxury, I think, is so apt considering some of the stuff I've just read in this week, including from Apple about the use of AI. So can you talk a little bit about this?
Sure.
Why is this in your top three? And then maybe that helps us to then move on to the discussion about what does this mean for actual use?
Yeah. Kind of how do we translate it, right?
Yes.
That's always the question I ask. How do we translate it into our strategy? Because it's going to be different in the next 3 months, right?
Right.
How do we translate it? How do we use it? I always say my job is to not understand the algorithms. My job is to understand how to use it and how to translate it into the action. And I think that's really important. Let's lean into how best to engage and to use it to, again, goes back to the heart of it, to empower our mission and our people, to make the world a better place. So with AI, I would start by saying this. There are two types of AI, at least as we think about AI in the use of the nonprofit space and the fundraising space and generosity. And you have predictive and generative. And I won't go into a deep dive. I mean, there are many resources online. I don't want to take us too far down describing those. And Nathan Chappelle with DonorSearch is a wonderful national resource. But there are two types, predictive and generative. When you think of Chat GPT or other tools that I think at least many of us at least have heard about, some are maybe using regularly, some it's terrifying or somewhere in between. That is one type, right? The generative. It's helping you put together potential words and language and phrases for direct mail appeals, all those different things. The other type of AI is predictive. How might we use the data to predict future outcomes? That is where we at JGA have really leaned into. Again, I take us back to about 5 years ago when we started thinking about what are we hearing as main big pain points in our nonprofits. Whether it was a nonprofit saying we hope to raise 3 million or we hope to raise 300 million. How do we understand what strategy to employ based on our current donor database? What data do we use? How do we start to figure that out? So actually about 2 years ago, we started working actually with DonorSearch and put together our other data product, Acuity Insights, using AI to help predict giving trends from your current database based on giving transactions, a myriad of different data points. For me, I think what's most important is, one, understanding just the difference between predictive and generative, right? How do we, as a nonprofit fundraiser in our field, how do we want to use it? Are we using it? And then two, to what end? And so again, for us, it's being able to understand AI is now accessible to all nonprofits. There are many organizations that are using AI in their fundraising work. There are many consulting firms that are starting to think about how to embed AI into doing predictive analytics. I think it's a more I can't say it's affordable across the board. I don't know how that works, across all national providers. But we have the resources and tools. And what we're seeing are board members, chairs of the board, asking for more clarity on philanthropic capacity on the donor database to then think about how they can best provide a future campaign fundraising goal or their own efforts as a board, right? Volunteer leadership is asking for this as well as other nonprofit leaders. And it goes back to, this is no longer a luxury. This is a necessity. We have to use the data and we have to have AI, in my opinion, that's constantly refreshing itself to give you better and more clear access.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about that because the predictive and any analytical models in the past, any data-driven work that we did in the past, maybe this was true even back in your University of Chicago days, we were reliant on data that was largely static. We would get an overlay of information and it could be very good, but it was at a point in time.
Yes.
If I'm understanding you correctly, an AI, any kind of AI predictive model is endeavoring to take our existing data, external and internal data, and then look at it dynamically. So you were talking this before, generational differences, right? I mean, everybody's 20 once and 50 another time if they're lucky enough to live that long.
Right.
So it's not as if we're the same person at 50 that we are at 20. And that means that things are changing. Our data has to change too.
I
So
think
I imagine that AI is a big part of that dynamism.
and how you're engaging with that organization, right?
Right,
So what is your giving, as one data point, giving look like?
right.
What is the way you're engaging volunteering on the website other ways? I mean, that was a big kind of aha moment for us several years ago in thinking about how to identify donors or work with nonprofits to identify the best donors. It wasn't enough to just say, well, they've given this amount, and based on their past history, we started asking the question, well, how are they behaving with you?
Hmm.
How are they engaging with you? Are they volunteering? Are they on a board? Are they attending an event? Are they putting their hand up? Because we know that, volunteering is a wonderful way to inspire and encourage gifting. So I say all that because I'm essentially what I'm saying, Jay, is yes, I agree. AI allows us to have that refresh of data, that re-examination of continuously looking at the data points. But I think this concept of how do we use AI in fundraising is important. And again, I know there's a lot of resources out there. For us, it's really important to think about how we are using it to affect change in our nonprofits. How are we using it to help us as part of a feasibility study, putting together a campaign goal? How are we using it to engage a major gift officer or development director to understand who they should be visiting? How does the board know who they can help reach out to, right? It's that type of behavior that I think is where we really start to get into fun, when we can
Right.
start to say, here are the spreadsheets, but then how do we actually start to translate that into the behavior of our staff and volunteers?
Well, it strikes me that organizations probably have to do a bit of thinking before they apply these things. That's not to say that they should wait, but rather that they should
No, yeah.
probably take action today to figure out the ways they want to integrate these things. Because if it's true that it's no longer a luxury, that also means it's somewhat urgent to make it available to ourselves the tools that will enable us to have the best communications with the people who care about our work, whether they're giving $25 or $25,000, that those people are important and we should be paying attention in a
I think
dynamic way.
it's a good point, James. I always think about, kind of like, sometimes we'll say, well, we need to raise more money. Well, do you? And to what end? Right. I mean, you can easily start to kind of refine that, right? What is the overarching vision? Does it align with the strategic plan?
Yeah.
Right? Is the board on board? But you start to kind of, I think, as you said, ask some of those questions that can help you, one, get a sense of how are we using data now? Do we have clarity on who our best prospects are based on how they engage with us, how they behave with us and their gifting? Do we regularly have access to an updated list of our best prospects? Do we know what messages to say to them? I mean, those are the type of questions that often kind of run through my mind, or that when we're in conversation, that I think can just help get the wheels turning, or maybe even thinking in a different way, or bringing leadership along.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I'd love to know from those who are with us live is whether or not people are using any form of predictive AI. And it just any comment at all along those lines, I'm sure we would value. And I also just want to acknowledge Mark, who's in the audience, who asked a great question. Brian gave me a terrific and thorough response about how JGA assigns prospects and donors based on personas. Which I think, again, relates to everything we're talking about now. But if you haven't seen that, I won't just read all that to you, but I want to encourage you to take a look at that. But for everyone else in the room, if you are considering or utilizing AI predictive models, it'd be very interesting to hear what you're doing and how you're applying them, and whether or not you have a plan for their application. Because to your point in this section of our conversation, it's not just about knowing that these things exist or even what's going on underneath the algorithm. It's about how to apply them. And so that often means that we need to have some sort of plan. Can you give us a thumb? We didn't prepare to do this, but so I'm putting you on the spot. But can you give me kind of a thumbnail sketch maybe of a situation where a client or an organization that was very successful in going from 0 to 60 with this kind of stuff, that they went from not really knowing what was in their database to really embracing people at an individual level using some of the best tools today?
Yes. So Hey, I'll take that unplanned question anytime, Jay. Hey, if it's around that topic, I'll live in that all day long. Just don't make me describe some weather pattern or something totally out of the data. So yes, and I think it will probably help kind of illuminate some of the things we're talking about. So here's a real life example. I won't share the organization's name just out of their own confidentiality,
Mm.
but we had an organization, JGA actually, come to us. It's now been 2 years ago. They had a new leader in their advancement department, so a new leader, and one, and I think this is an important part of the story, one that said, we need to be doing things differently. There was a desire, he was expressing a desire to want to be innovative and to try. And I think that's important, right? Because I think that's part of data, right? We have to be willing to explore and to try and to do it with sound strategy behind it. Let's not do darts on a dartboard. But so they came to us 2 years ago as a new leader. And honestly, they had been doing a lot of event-based fundraising as their primary tool of fundraising. And I think we all probably have opinions on event-based fundraising, but what we do know is that the best way to usually maximize or to have a ROI on your fundraising of 500% or better would be to have individual giving, major giving program, one-on-one conversations, right? Where you're really able to have that connection with individuals. And so his big pain point was, how do we start to shift? How do we start to get away from event-based fundraising to one-on-one engagement? And how do we engage the board in this process as well? And so what we started talking about, and I should say the third piece was, and we want to do a campaign in about 2 years. That was the other piece of it. So we said, well, where are you now and where do you want to go? And they hadn't done a campaign in about 7 to 10 years. So there was a lot of either new or things that hadn't been done. They did not have a donor base that was regularly being engaged. So with that, all that to be said, what we did several approaches, and it's fascinating to think about where they were just 2 years ago to now. So first of all, it was an internal review, a development audit, what's working well and what's not working well, right? Kind of lay the groundwork, look at the examination of the foundation. The other piece of that was conducting acuity darts, actually, in this case, is what we were talking about with those personas earlier. And to say, not only who are your best prospects, we know it identifies about 60% on average additional prospects for the donor base. So, with that, who are your best prospects? And again, what do you say to them? What is the communication, the messaging? So, we went through the process with them. They implemented their recommendations, the detailed recommendations from that, and they've nearly doubled their giving. Now they had event-based fundraising. So if you think about the slope, right? It's a pretty steep slope. Will it stay like this forever? I don't know if that's realistic, but they've been able to do so because they've completely transformed the way they are using staff time. They are now using staff time in a much more sophisticated way and board time. They're volunteers as well. They're able to talk to their board about key individuals that they're hoping to make relationships and contacts with, in addition to who the board knows, of course. But to be able to also say, this is what we think motivates and engages them. And this is a board member that might be highly aligned based on personality. But the staff is now able to start thinking strategically about who could be in their portfolio, their list of individuals to engage, where before it was kind of a guessing game, or it was people that attended an event. So that's a long answer, Jay, to a way that we've really been able to kind of see that transformation of an organization. But I'll tell you, it also required the organization to say, that means we're not going to put this mail appeal out because it's going to be a different approach. And that can be scary, I think, sometimes, right? Or to say, but we've always done it this way. I mean, I think that's the human in us having to resist the urge. But I do say that because it did require a willingness to try something new. And then once they started seeing the results, it's a lot easier to continue.
Right. I mean, any kind of change is hard, especially if a process we're using seems to work, but things change. And so I guess we have to invest, whether it's financially or the staff time or the business process, whatever it is,
Mhm.
we have to invest in the future, right?
And I think the other thing I would say too is, I think where we have seen data just work, it's it's critical. Again, it's back that it's not a luxury, is when an organization is thinking about going into a campaign, again, whether it's large, small, it's all dependent, right, on the organization. You meet them where they are. We have to get clarity on what is the capacity of that organization's donor base, right? We, meaning the collective fundraiser and all of us, or the collective development professional, and being able to have clarity on what that looks like can really, really help. It's required as a feasibility study. There are multiple ways to engage top donors, but interviews, focus groups, surveys. How do we engage with the donors? Excuse me, the database. It's predictive analytics.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, um, and I can imagine there's everybody again is at a different place. Part of this may also have to do with their budget, how long their office has been around, how many people they have.
Mhm.
Do they have a person in a position where they're going to be able to help negotiate change in the process, from the top to every staff member? How do you help them to make that leap, Lee?
Um, it's usually, asking a lot of questions. Now, maybe that's the consultant in me, Jay, right? The ask a question, or maybe it's as fundraisers, we know the best way to get a gift is to ask advice, right? It's the same, I think, concept. But in all seriousness, it's really getting down to what is most important to that organization. Both, I would say, at the leadership level, but also at the board level. There has to be alignment there. And
Mm.
how do we see it connect to the development plan, to the strategic plan, to the overarching vision? If we have really good clarity on where we're going, then that allows us to start to have that conversation about, well, what are the tools necessary to get there? And do we all have a shared understanding of where we're wanting to go? And so I think it really goes back to having the conversations about what are the key things that are most important, and education. I mean, that's something that I've really, I think, had an aha moment over the last even just year. The amount of education that we, at least at JJ, are doing with our nonprofits, talking about, if you receive well screening or predictive analytics, how do we use this data? How do we then take all that and re-optimize a portfolio for somebody, listing? Or how do we think about staff time differently? It's taking the time to educate and to show the value of what that means in the data, which is, I guess, is like anything, right?
And how do you keep fresh? Because you are, I mean, you have a lot of information at your disposal. Your firm is working on this stuff every single day, but you are clearly, at that edge where you're bringing all that information in. So how are you doing that?
Mhm.
And I mean, how
Um,
can others try to emulate that?
I I always go back to our JJ values. Those are my guardrails, right? And if it's part of the JJ value, then it's something that drives me, that either tells me yes or no. I keep it simple, right? The values say yes, keep going forward. The values say no, you don't do it. One of the JJ values, in addition to being authentic and responsive, it's innovation. I feel a strong desire to provide back to the sector, right? It's why we're in the field. We're all in this together. So that's my number one driving, right? That's kind of my internal motivation, right? It's a key value that we have promised to the sector and to the clients. The way in which I do it, is this is where it gets informal. This is where I'm reading the industry publications. I'm looking at LinkedIn. I listen to someone really smart and say, "Can I grab 30 minutes with you?" And simply listen and learn more. I think it's that continuous learner piece. The other thing is, at least at our firm at JGA, we're all empowered and embodied to do that. So I don't have to take on the mantle of doing it myself. I have 15 other really smart people that can teach me along the way. And I think that's one way to do it. But it's formal things like webinars, like you, Jay, you're a terrific resource. It's informal conversations. But I think the more that we're connecting with each other as industry leaders and professionals, our sector gets better. I am a big believer in not only empowering women in this field, but also empowering the professionalization of this field. We do an unbelievable important work in the nonprofit sector. Again, data is not a luxury, right? We deserve to have the best conversations and data and research because we're doing too good of work to not do it. That's my soapbox, and I'll get off it.
No, no. Stay on that soapbox. I want to make sure that I'm opening the doors to any other questions from people who are with us live, because we have another few minutes, but I want to make sure that you can get your questions answered. If you have any or any comments you want to make, I think those would be wonderful to see. So Sky had made a comment, for example, about making investments in products. And I don't want to get specific about which product because that's not the purpose of our series, but that is a question. I think we're kind of talking about it a bit, about the importance of making those decisions and those investments. But if there are other questions like that, I know that this is a great place to ask them, but also you can ask them afterwards. So Lee, I think you had some contact information you can share.
Sure.
So you can
And I
pull that
think
up.
the investment piece is a really good question, and I think it's being able to ask whomever you're engaging with, what is the ROI, right? Help me understand how many more prospects would this identify? Or how would I use this information? I mean, I think those are all really, really good questions to ask, and that helps. So Jay, I'm sharing with you now the
Yes.
information on both on LinkedIn and with JGA as well. And one other thing I was going to share. Speaking of fundraising and AI, we're actually working with fundraising.ai, the summit that
Oh,
leading
yes.
professionals, Nathan Chappelle, who I've referenced earlier, and several others who have really done a terrific job putting together the first ever framework, ethical framework. How do we use AI in fundraising, right? What's our guide? What are our guiding principles? Which are all really big, heavy questions, but they've put those together. And so we're actually putting together the first ever live event for the fundraising AI here in Indianapolis. And so it's, if you're interested, you can register. But I say that because I think that's another way in which we go back to how are we listening and learning from each other, right? There's so many resources. How are we sharing those resources for one another?
Right. This is so important because you just touched on the other piece, which is ethical, the ethical fundraising, and I know you alluded to that even with the values within your firm. But when it comes to AI, that's probably another one of those vetting questions we can ask about how information is adopted, utilized, and are we conforming to the set of ethics which are appropriate to our field. You can see Lee's contact information, by the way, in the chat. So if you want to click any of that, you can do that, or you can do what I do, which is to grab my phone and grab one of those QR codes. But anyway, all of that is coming up in the chat right now. Lee, I want to just take 1 second to talk about those ethical principles with you, because sometimes when we adopt new technologies, it's just, it's the kid in the candy store effect. Why is it important to think about this for all the fundraising.ai people, but particularly for you? Why is this important to us as a sector?
Yeah. I'm really glad you asked that because I think it comes down to this, Jay. We are privileged to walk alongside individuals as they think about investing, engaging, supporting an organization, right? A donation. And let's underscore that. It's a gift. If we have the privilege, the trust inspired in us, if we for 1 second step out of that, or even for 1 second start to have behavior that's not ethical, we've lost our whole foundation as fundraisers. I mean, I think it's imperative that we maintain the highest standards of ethics, not only in fundraising, but now, as you were saying with AI, because again, we're in a very, very special situation where people are allowing us to come into their lives to talk about their finances, and it requires trust. And once trust is broken, everything is gone. So I just think I can't underscore enough how important that is. And that's why I'm like fundraising.ai. I'm so glad that they are around and have taken the time and the brain power to put that guiding principles. I'd recommend people to check that out because I think it's a really good tool for our industry. And I think it's something that we all need to be adhering to and asking the questions, are we adhering to it? Right? Are we doing this and kind of checking ourselves and our organization? But our work is too darn important to not hold ourselves to the highest standard, right?
Yeah, especially in these shark-infested waters of AI. It seems like we are above above the fray because we're doing these things earlier. We're setting up guardrails before a lot of other people have built a highway. So it's pretty impressive, really. I think we should give ourselves a little bit of a pat on the back. We're often behind the ball when it comes to adoption of technology. It seems like this time it's potentially the reverse.
You know, and I think that's why for me, I'm always driving on how do we continue to professionalize our sector or the fundraising sector, the nonprofit sector. And I think that's for us at JJ why we really wanted to say, how can all nonprofits have access to tools that help you use data in the way that's most helpful to you? We do really good work in this field, right? And we need to continue to do all we can to professionalize it and to support each other in doing it.
Thank you for all this, Lee. Really, I know we've just scratched the surface of some of what we could have talked about, but I know that people know how to reach you, which is important, but also where they can see you. So whether or not it's following you on LinkedIn or checking out the work of JGA, which I hope they will do. Also, the fundraising.ai meeting, which is coming up, and I believe that's free again, isn't it?
It is. It's July 11th in
July
person.
11th. Right.
Mhm.
Plus, your work as a firm and personally with the Giving Institute, I think, again, it bears repeating because, again, philanthropy moves at the speed of trust. We're about to have another report. We don't know, maybe you know, but I don't know what it's going to say. But whatever it says, we're going to have to take action in accordance with what we learn. And a lot of that action is going to be informed by all the things you've been sharing with us today. So that data comes up soon, and you'll be one of the primary folks sharing that with the sector. So we appreciate that very much.
June 25th. Yeah. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Jay. Thanks so much for all you do for the field.
Oh, thank you, Lee. I mean, it's an honor to have you here, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to you again real soon. In the meantime, follow Lee's work, check out JGA, and go to these conferences. You will not regret it. And also hang out with us next in a couple of days from now. On Thursday, we have another great session coming up you will not want to miss. And if you're not on the list for receiving these things, all you have to do is click the QR code you're about to see, and you can then follow this and be there the next time. So until then, take care. We'll see you soon. Thank you, Lee.